Hello, my name is Glenn Brand, and I have the privilege to serve as the Superintendent of Schools here in Wilmington. My intention over the course of the next amount of time is to provide our community with an update on the very complicated matter related to school reopening here in Wilmington. For those of the community who have been following this discussion and these planning stages throughout not only the Commonwealth, but throughout the country, you'll have a sense of, no doubt, the challenges that are associated with school reopening during this time of the pandemic. My hope is to try and synthesize the various amounts of information out there to provide you with both an update on our planning efforts to date, what it is that we're using for guidance moving forward, and most importantly, to provide our parents, guardians at this time with enough information to make an informed choice for your family and what you deem to be best and appropriate as we think quickly ahead to the fall and reopening of schools. First, let me just acknowledge that which sits before us, and that is that it is well understood that this ongoing pandemic has proven and continues to prove very, very challenging and difficult for all of us. Whether we are members of a family that have frontline workers during this very challenging time, whether you are a parent guardian and grappling with how best to parent during these unconventional times to know what's best for your family. For our youth who have been robbed of so many things or so many things put on pause for the kinds of activities and engaging opportunities for our young people that have been suspended during this time. This most certainly has and undoubtedly would seem will continue to be a very, very challenging time for us. And so all the more to be working together collaboratively in constant communication and doing what we can to help support one another. My job is to bring focus to the collective efforts of our administrative team, our school committee, and our staff towards thinking about the reopening of school and the resumption of schooling come the fall. The efforts have been far and wide in terms of a great number of people who've been contributing to this work, and it is necessary to shift our thinking as we try and attend not only to the physical and health and well-being of our students and our staff, but equally important for both their current and long-term development and growth as young people and as members of our society. And so the presentation that I will deliver here in a moment is going to try and encapsulate all that we've been planning to this point in time and will continue to plan going forward. I would note that this presentation will be available. Thank you to the support and partnership of WCTV, and will be available on demand for anybody to view over the next period of time. And the slides that I'm going to use in a moment will also be posted separately on our website for those that may wish to further reference them. With that, I am going to share my screen and share the slides before you here today. So first up, to provide some context for our reopening plans. First, it's important for the Wilmington community to know that we are working closely with public health experts, teachers, administrators, community members, and parents, guardians to plan for safe and healthy reopening of school. As some of you no doubt know by this point in time, the Commissioner of Education has requested that each school district submit a final plan for the fall that includes three learning models. Those learning models, words and phrases that you'll hear more about through the presentation, include full-time in-person instruction, hybrid plan with both in-person instruction as well as remote, and a learning model that includes a fully remote approach. I think it's important to underscore this next point, and that is that we are in need of planning for all three models. And obviously, as a school system, not unlike any others around us, one model has to emerge as the method or approach that's going to be utilized to open school. However, I think that this is a very key piece to understand and recognize as we have these broad discussions, that flexibility here and the ability to transition from one model to another is certainly going to be paramount as we continue to contend with this health crisis before us. We had over 50 people who collectively were served as members of the WPS Reopening Advisory Group. They have worked diligently and put in hours and hours of time throughout the month of July, and really started their work before July began. My sincere thanks to each and every member of our community who served on that advisory group. Their planning and their collective thinking not only has been influential in shaping our reopening plans at the district level, but certainly a number of very important elements to consider for our school leaders as plans unfold for specific operations of schools on a day-to-day basis. We've created a new section of our website that is very prominent. If you go to the Wilmington Public Schools website, there's a banner across the top that is entitled Reopening. And if you explore that section, you will find a growing body of information related to our reopening plans. And we will be including the final recommendations from the Reopening Advisory Group shortly. Not only has the advisory group been working closely with relevant guidance, but so too have our district and school administrators. This is a snapshot of one section of the website that I just mentioned a moment ago, and it profiles all of the various pieces of guidance that have been put forth by the Department of Education, DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. There is no shortage of guidance within which to work and to necessarily plan. Some are recommendations. There are other elements that are included in these guidelines that are requirements. And we are closely attuned to following them as we build our plans here in Wilmington. They are live links, so any members of the community who might wish to know more about a particular subject, you can visit the website and you can further explore. They're also posted on the Department of Education website. So first, let's begin with a more expansive discussion around the foremost topic, and that is health and safety. After weeks of discussion with numerous stakeholders within the Department of Education, as well as members outside who have collaborated closely with them as part of their own return to school working group, they have consulted with and relied upon the guidance and the insight and the thoughts of a number of different medical professionals. And at the present time, there continues to be a clear consensus amongst the stakeholders involved in their work that in-person learning is both possible and certainly preferred. I'm going to take a moment to, I'll draw your attention to a video here. This is a live link that takes you to a video that is a couple of minutes in length, but would certainly recommend you taking a look at when you have a chance to view the presentation. The current plan for health and safety for any in-person learning. The current guidance that has been issued by the Department of Education is to aim for 6 feet physical distance between students with no less than 3 feet. The Center for Disease Control, or CDC guidance, it's also been issued around school reopening, focuses on specifically 6 feet. And that 6 feet distance is what we are intending to aim for here in Wilmington. We thought about the 3 feet distance, but as I mentioned at the July 22nd presentation, which is also available online, we are aiming for 6 feet as the metric to be used within our classrooms. Face coverings and masks is obviously also a very, very important component of the discussions around health and safety as it relates to COVID-19. DESE, just as a reminder, issued guidance for grades 2 to 12. Here in Wilmington, we extended that requirement to grade 1 students, and that was shared with the community back in late July when we provided the last update. But I do want to inform the committee and our staff that I'm extending this further and will be making it a requirement for all students to wear a mask when in school here in Wilmington. DESE has issued clear guidance that all students, regardless of age, are indeed required to wear a mask on buses. So it is certainly understood that questions are raised around monitoring of COVID within our community and what clears the way for a considered safe return or some deviation, a closure of a school or the system. And so I'll just briefly touch upon that. There are a number of health and safety steps to consider when we're talking about a return to school, the physical distance piece, and of course the masks. But in addition to that, as I think we're all becoming much more aware of, testing and contact tracing and quarantining and isolation, all collectively are measures that help stop the spread of COVID-19, which is of course what we are focused on. Contact tracing for purposes of isolation and quarantine is overseen by the Wilmington Board of Health at the local level, but obviously with assistance from staff and families. Local cases of COVID-19, in case those members of our community who are not aware, are reported to the Wilmington Board of Health, and the Board of Health provides a weekly update of cases in Wilmington through their website as well as social media. Decisions on various phases, either forward or backwards, if you will, in terms of the reopening or closure of schools, I will take the opportunity to point out, falls ultimately under the governor in conjunction with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and at the local level here, the Wilmington Board of Health. When there is suspected in-school transmission beyond one cohort of students or staff, for that matter, Wilmington school leaders will consult with the Wilmington Board of Health to discuss further steps. And those further steps are highlighted in the middle of the screen: making a decision to close school or part of a school for extensive cleaning, or making a decision to close school for a 14-day quarantine period. And certainly, if the community as a whole experiences an outbreak, in my role as superintendent, will be in close contact with the Board of Health to determine whether it's appropriate to close a school or the district as a whole. And then the final bullet, it has been made clear that any decision to close a school or school system as a whole will require consultation with the Department of Education. So let's get a little deeper into instruction and reopening, because health and safety obviously is of prime importance in framing this discussion around reentry and reopening, but so too is, of course, what our plans are for instruction. So first, this is a slide that may appear somewhat familiar for those that were tuning in to the last community update, but I think it is important, again, just to pause and make sure that there's some clarity around what the three models include. And it's with deliberation that the arrow streaming across the top is pointing in both directions, because the more and more that you come to recognize what we're really talking about here, this is the notion of a possible shift or transition or pivots, a variety of words that I know are certainly being used within discussions around school reopening. In-person learning on the left, think of that as pre-COVID-19, back when schools were operating effectively in person completely. The difference here, though, is that necessary and appropriate health and safety requirements would need to be issued by DESE. But there also may be, as part of this, a subset of students, subset of staff that may not be able to be in person. The hybrid learning model is where students will alternate between in-person learning with appropriate safety requirements and remote learning. And I'll explain this in greater detail in a couple of moments. And as part of this model, and in accordance with the Department of Education requirements, high needs students may need to still be participating on a more full-time basis in person in an effort to try and best meet their needs. On the far right-hand side, remote learning, and that is certainly a mode of instruction where students are receiving their instruction away from school at home. However, an important piece to note is that structured learning time, according to the DESE, requirements is a very important and central component of what that looks like. So where does that leave us for consideration at this point in time for the reopening of school in Wilmington? As I mentioned earlier, we have full intentions to structure our classrooms and our programs using 6 feet social distance. This also applies not only to the classroom, but important to point out during lunch and really any other times while students are in the building. But as I mentioned previously, with that 6 feet distance as our parameter, it is simply not possible to have all students back in person. Our classrooms are not big enough to accommodate 6 foot distance between students with the level of enrollment. And I would suggest to you that this holds true for most, if not all, schools in the Commonwealth. Based upon the current health conditions in our community, and I think this is an important distinction here in our community because this very well could be different in different communities throughout the Commonwealth. The advice of our local health advisors at this time is that it is safe to reopen with the appropriate health and safety requirements that has been mentioned, and with a hybrid model of instruction, which will indeed allow for some of our students at a time to be in school while some will be learning remotely. And the last point, collectively, the interest in and the belief that the hybrid model for us at this point in time is the most appropriate is that it combines that opportunity for in-person instruction with far fewer students in the schoolhouse at one time. So let me provide you with a little bit of a more expansive overview of what we're planning right now for the hybrid model at grades 1 to 12. For students in 1 to 12, our learning plan as it's unfolding and taking shape right now is proposing 2 full days of in-person learning for half of our students on Mondays and Thursdays. So that would be a consistent schedule on Mondays and Thursday. And for reference purposes, we'll call that cohort A. For the other group of students, cohort B, they will receive 2 full days of in-person learning on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I'm sorry, that's a typo to correct. Cohort A, Mondays and Thursdays. Cohort B, Tuesdays and Fridays. We'll make that change before we post the presentation. The other 3 days of the week for each cohort will be used for remote learning. And every Wednesday, students from both groups, both cohorts, A and B, will interact together with their teacher remotely. Important piece to note here in terms of that flexibility and that transition is that if the entire district has to switch to fully remote, all students, both students in cohort A and cohort B, will transition to remote learning with their current teachers. Also a piece to note here around siblings. We know that many, of course, of our families have more than one child. We are going to be scheduling children from the same household in the same cohort, if a family indeed elects to have their student participate in the hybrid model of instruction. Some more information around the hybrid plan. We are going to make every effort to follow a regular schedule as closely as possible at each school. We know, though, that when students are in person, one thing that will be different will be the possible need to further regulate our entry and dismissal procedures to make sure that we have appropriate social distancing and such in place. We also know that we are going to need to schedule far more hand washing and mask breaks. But otherwise, the intention is to try and mirror the regular schedule when students are in person as much as possible. We are going to aim to provide elementary students with as many of their typical courses as possible, and at the high school and middle school level. We're also going to try and do the same, but there may be scheduling limitations that may make this not quite possible. And so we're going to have to explore that further in the coming weeks. At-home learning days, when students are not in person, so for those other 3 days, will include a combination of assignments, classwork, other continuations of learning that certainly has been started in school, but that may continue and leveraged as well through what I'm calling a more robust use by our educators of a learning management system. At the pre-K and K, or pre-kindergarten and kindergarten level, our current plan at the Wildwood and the Boutwell School, as members of our community know, that they are the two buildings that house these populations, student populations. We are planning a half-day program with morning and afternoon sessions. This again still allows us to have the physical distancing and spacing of 6 feet, but we are also recognizing that for this group of students, in-person learning certainly is also developmentally appropriate, and we believe will provide a number of things: age-appropriate curriculum, while working within those guidelines and the restrictions, a consistent daily routine for obviously our youngest within our mix, for our special populations, those students that may have higher specific needs, disabilities, for example, English learners. It will provide them with more access to necessary services, and also the smaller class sizes, again, the benefit there. I will point out that if in-person instruction is something that is indeed on the horizon and is possible in the future, that we will certainly reassess the feasibility and ability to return to full-day programming like we would otherwise have in place for this age of our students. So just a couple of things to clarify. Again, the hybrid model is one of 3 models that learning models that we are required to submit to the Department of Education. At this point in time, it's what we are pursuing and electing, if you will, to reopen school in the fall. However, I do think it's really important to point out to members of our community that there are some conditions that certainly could impact the degree to which we can employ this model. These are some of them, and they are the foremost that come to mind. First off, staffing. We anticipate that it's quite possible that we may have a group of staff who are unable to return to work in person. And so we have to sort that out and determine which of our staff and complement will be available to work either remotely or in person. And that certainly could have an impact on the ability to offer programs in person. This is, as I've alluded to a couple of times, this is very, very challenging and complex. It is unlike a typical scheduling and planning for school operations. And we've done the hard work at a 20,000 foot view in terms of developing of these plans. But I must say that there is an incredible amount of work still to come at the building levels in terms of trying to program and organize and schedule things. And there are immense challenges. Health conditions, of course, could change, and they could dictate whether or not we are unable to pursue a hybrid model if things change here, either locally or certainly at the state level. And I would certainly be remiss if I didn't say that there are, I believe, quite a few other factors that we may not have even anticipated that we have to shift our focus on and think about before we can operate the hybrid model. One, as just a small example, is transportation. I'll get to that a little bit further in this presentation, but there are some great restrictions that we have to work within. And we're not confident at this very moment until we hear from our families of how many students are planning to ride the bus, if we are going to have to pursue, for example, bringing online more buses. So that's just one example of I suspect many that could impact our ability to launch the hybrid model. Here's a sample of the elementary hybrid schedule that we're working with right now and proposing. This is not finalized, but this is what we're honing in on. And I can certainly share with you that this looks somewhat typical for other districts around that may be using a similar approach for hybrid with a couple of days in and a couple of days out. So cohort A and cohort B, you can see as I've described. So think of that as the 4th grade class that otherwise would have been together as a whole, 20 students when school opened in September. If all 20 students or some subset therein, families wish them to participate in the hybrid model, they would be split into 2 groups. So cohort A would have a approximately 10 students, and cohort B, approximately 10. And that would be the respective schedule. A lot of things to take in there, but as you can see, cohort A in school Monday and Thursday, remote Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and the flip of that for cohort B. At the middle and high school level, somewhat similar as well. Again, splitting cohorts. This becomes a little bit more complicated at the secondary level because students are changing classes, but in essence, it's taking the population of 9th grade students, to think of it that way, or the 6th grade students, and dividing it in half. I also think, though, that it is important for members of the community to have a little bit of a sense of what hybrid will look like, because even though we are seeking to pave the way here, or the path to bring back our students and staff with the respective guidelines that have been issued by the Department of Education, things within our school environments are not going to be the same. And the next 2 slides just highlight some of these aspects. Recess, at the elementary level, for example. We're anticipating that we will have our outdoor playgrounds shut down during the day because we don't believe that we'll be able to attend to those in terms of the necessary cleaning. That could change, but right now that's the thinking. Shared equipment, not only during recess, but during school time as a whole, will certainly have to be extremely limited, if at all. It's also the case that students will likely be contained in smaller groups, as opposed to the entire student body going out to recess and commingling at the same time. That's not likely going to be possible. Lunch certainly will be very different. The physical distance of 6 feet, I profiled a picture or two in our last slideshow in July about what that looks like. We are going to have to drastically reduce the capacity in the lunchrooms. So even for all the students in one of the cohorts that's in the building at one time, they're there for a full day. We plan to feed students lunch or make lunch available. But it is the case that we may have to have more lunches and or certainly spread out students beyond just the cafeteria to adhere to that 6-foot distance. We're going to look for various places to do so. Classrooms, there will no longer be group seating. You had a sense of that through, again, the last presentation. Desks have to be in single rows, 6 feet apart and facing the same way. There will be very limited, if at all, time out of the seat for students, again, because of the physical distance requirements. And to the greatest extent possible, and this is still something that we have to drill down on and plan for, but specialist teachers, unlike in typical times when students generally move to the specialist teacher, for example, 5th grade students, when they're not in their core subjects, might make their way to the music room or to the art room. It is the guidance that specialist teachers, where possible, move to the students so that they are staying in the same environment. Extracurricular activities, right out of the gate, we know very clearly that certain activities such as chorus, wind, instrumental playing can only happen outdoors. So those are unable to happen. So not only is that play a role in impacting some of the scheduling or programming that students might have access to at the various grade levels, but it certainly will impact any extracurricular activities. And before and after school extracurricular activities, I would strongly predict right now will simply not be operational in person when school resumes. We are going to explore how we might make those activities possible remotely for students, but as you can imagine, that's going to require some creative planning. Restrictions on window air conditioning. I know that this has been a source of some, in the best of times and normal times, some concern around the lack of air conditioning in most of our buildings, and that's true. Some of our classrooms have window air conditioning. However, that really does not matter because the guidance is that window air conditioners nor fans can be used during the current circumstances because they recirculate internal air, and that is not what is advised. Windows need to remain open as much as possible, and that holds true for the colder weather as well. And masks and hydration. Certainly, we know, as I mentioned before, masks to be worn at all times, but other implications such as the need to close down water fountains, for example. And so we're thinking differently about the need for students to bring water or to also provide that in some other way. Let me just focus for a moment on high-need student populations. We have an obligation, an important one at that, to be thinking as well about our students that have some greater needs, such as disabilities, English learners, economically disadvantaged or foster or care or homeless students. The DESE guidance is clear that these students need to be prioritized and prioritized in a way to provide as much in-person services, as many in-person services as possible, even in a hybrid model. And so work has begun to identify the students that fall into this category, and there are some specific criteria that certainly we'll be looking at carefully with the guidance issued by the Department of Education to help determine those students. Let me shift from the hybrid model to remote instruction for a few moments, because this is obviously an important area as well in this discussion. So first off, I want to pause here and distinguish between homeschooling versus fully remote instruction, because understandably, I think there's maybe some confusion out there. So homeschooling your child, not just here in Wilmington, but anywhere, is very different than what we were talking about as part of the planning here, at least in the Commonwealth, for fully remote instruction. Essentially, when a family decides to pursue a homeschooling pathway for their child, they are withdrawing their child from the district. Fully remote instruction, on the other hand, is very much in contrast with that, and that within these current conditions, the Department of Education has indeed required districts to provide the fully remote instruction as an option for families. However, they remain fully enrolled in the district. The homeschool scenario, again, obviously the parent or guardian is taking on that responsibility for educating, developing an educational plan. In the fully remote model, the district has to assume that responsibility. Not unlike any other school committee, at least that I'm aware of, or district, you'll generally find a homeschool policy. Our school committee has one as well too. And there is a formal application process that has to be submitted to my office, the superintendent of schools, in order to approve such a plan. But let's go deeper with remote instruction. So as I mentioned a moment ago, it is crystal clear that districts have to provide families with this choice if they want to have their student continue to be fully enrolled, but in a fully remote mode of learning. Regardless of what model that we use, even if that is hybrid, or even if that, for that matter, might be fully in person. This option during these circumstances, during this health crisis, this has to be provided for families. In our previous spring survey, just out of interest, at that time, 68% of our families had indicated that they may wish to pursue the remote instruction as an option. 25% also indicated they weren't sure. And so getting to the heart of these actual numbers, which I'll talk about in a moment, and this is that the binding decision that I know that has caught people's attention, we need very clear numbers around this to help plan, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And so we'll be very interested to track where we end up here. Again, though, it's important to note that this idea of choosing remote instruction is not the same as homeschool. So keep in mind these things as it relates to home instruction, because again, I know that there's a lot of questions about this, and so the intent here is to hopefully provide some greater insight. So as mentioned earlier, for those students who may participate, parent guardians choose their children to participate in the hybrid model, they will be placed into an A or B cohort. Students who are not in that model, the hybrid model, whose families choose remote learning, will be placed, at least for conversation purposes now and planning, into a third cohort. Just for the time being, we'll refer to that cohort as cohort C. We will, whenever possible, provide students who are participating in that cohort instruction from a Wilmington Public School teacher. But as I mentioned earlier, we also are in the process, and this holds true for the hybrid model in as much as it does for the remote instruction model. We have to see the exact staff that we have available to deliver service. Our current plan right now is to provide for elementary students, again, with the same courses that their peers would be receiving in school, albeit delivered remotely. The same holds true at the high school. We will make every effort there as well too. At the secondary level, if there are opportunities to pursue other virtual classroom program options, and we have a shortage of staff, we may have to pursue that, but again, we have to sort that out. The first priority within this sort of thinking of remote instruction is, of course, to secure a teacher, and then second priority, if that can't be done, is there another option before simply not offering a program? And that's more referring to some of the electives, I would say, at the secondary level. There clearly is concern around the discussion and thought of remote instruction based upon the spring. And this is, as I think everyone is aware, not a conversation that probably has not been held or thought everywhere. When we were cast into, in a moment's notice, the situation in the spring with lack of preparedness, that was a very challenging set of circumstances, and I think that everyone would agree. However, going forward with the opportunity for time to plan, we are going to be strengthening remote learning, not only because we believe and know that that's what's best for our students, but in addition, it's what's expected. It's what's expected from the Commissioner of Education and the Department of Education. We are engaged in negotiations with the Wilmington Teachers Association, or WTA, right now to ensure that students have more face-time, synchronous learning, in-person hours of instruction than they did last spring. That's an important element of this. And it's also important to note that the Department of Ed is expecting that hours of instruction and remote learning count towards time on learning. It will be far more scheduled and really, to the greatest extent possible, emulate the hybrid model that I mentioned earlier. Students will be engaged in synchronous or scheduled activity throughout the course of the day, far more than was the case in the spring. And that will center around such things as assignments and check-ins, small group activities, and so on. We are primarily planning to use Google Meet and Google Classroom to facilitate this. And it's important to note that instruction will include content areas that are included in the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks. As in the spring, our students, again, and plans are well underway for both acquiring additional equipment and repurposing the equipment that we have. We'll provide students with Chromebooks for those that need, and as well, hotspots will be provided by the district for families in need of wireless access. Attendance and active participation for remote instruction is expected. A consistent schedule of synchronous instruction will be provided. And again, lessons and assignments will be aligned to the frameworks. If you are interested in learning more about the specific guidance, I'll draw your attention to that page earlier on our website where there's an actual entire document on guidance for fall remote learning that you can find more information on. A couple more slides in terms of just overall operational considerations. So how are we going to determine school reopening, closing, or shifting from one model to another? Just to reiterate, this will be closely aligned with the Department of Public Health guidelines, and that will determine which on that continuum way we might have to shift. That is to say, if we start in hybrid, but we need to shift to fully remote, we'll do so based upon the data that's around and the guidance. And certainly the idea of thinking about dividing our student body into cohorts, I believe will provide us with more flexibility as we have to shift or make the pivot depending on the circumstances and conditions around us. Transportation, I mentioned a couple of times. I just want to bring brief attention to this. It is still our plan to provide the opportunity for families to utilize our transportation services for their children if you so wish. I know many have indicated that they plan to drive their children to school if we're reopening in person, which is certainly fine. You're welcome to do so. However, know that we will be providing bus transportation service that will very closely follow what are some pretty strict guidelines, including, of course, cleaning and disinfecting. I've mentioned masks, leaving windows open, and the guidance right now speaks to that even in the colder weather. So I think that that's an important piece to point out, and a drastic reduction in the capacity because of the way and need to spread out students within seating. There's actually a few diagrams within the DESE transportation guidance that if you're interested, you may wish to take a look at. However, this is an important piece to note, as much as hopefully members of our community can appreciate. We also have to have extremely firm numbers and awareness of which students are planning to take the bus and which are not. And this is a question that is in the survey, and it also has to be a binding decision. That we need to plan for the opening of school knowing exactly on which routes, how many students there will be, so that we can make sure that we are not obviously in violation of the guidelines around social distance. And that's obviously, that's of paramount importance. A couple of slides on CARES program. You know that you have heard us talk about this previously. I want our members of our community to know that planning certainly is underway, but like so many other things, this is also a very complicated picture. So a bit of an update for families who I know are probably quite interested in this. So first off, I should point out that we are not planning to offer at this time any programs at the early childhood centers or the middle school. We've had a 6th grade program in the past. The focus will be on programming in 4 schools: Shawsheen, Woburn, West, and the North. We will only be able to start using the cafeteria space for programs. And that has to do with a variety of factors, including simply providing the time and literally space to clean and disinfect locations. CARES will have to greatly limit their enrollment based upon numbers because the CARES program will also have to follow the specific guidelines and around 6 feet distance. And certainly we anticipate that the demand will exceed the ability to provide spots for families, and so we are going to keep a wait list. There's a little bit more information for those that might be interested in reading more about how many students and what the overall plan is here for the CARES program at those 4 schools that I mentioned. I've mentioned lunch, but just again to reiterate, for those families considering sending their children to be a part of the hybrid program, because we are planning to have students all day, students certainly will need to be provided with an opportunity to eat lunch, whether they're bringing it in person or getting it from our food services. As I mentioned, 6 feet distance will be used, and we're probably going to have to move outside of the cafeteria for that. We are well aware of the fact that we need to be cognizant of students with food allergies, and so we're going to be certainly building plans around any students that have those health conditions. Plans for the school calendar. I think probably many are aware, but just in case you have not heard this, the Commissioner of Education has officially reduced the school year from 180 to 170 school days. A typical school year, the minimum number of days is that 180. So what that provides is 10 additional days that can be dedicated for training and professional development for staff. As you've probably heard me speak before in previous school committee meetings, I am an absolute firm believer in the opportunity for time to help support our educators and staff in engaging in rich and meaningful professional development and training. But I have to tell you that 10 days, while I can appreciate, might seem like a lot for folks. The list is extensive, not only around the protocols for health and safety and the safety requirements, but thinking, of course, very differently about how to embark upon whether it be remote or the hybrid model of instruction. This is very different for our educators, and it is going to be critical to make sure that we can be effective, to provide time to think very carefully and deeply about how best to do this. I will be bringing a revised calendar recommendation forward to the school committee at their next meeting to vote on. This is a necessary aspect of their authority to approve. But I can tell members of the community that school, regardless of the model that we're talking about here or you're interested in pursuing for your family, will not start any earlier than September the 16th. So where does that take us in terms of next steps from here over the next number of weeks as we move through the month of August and prepare for the arrival of September? On Thursday, August the 6th, family survey will be sent to all of our WPS families that will, as has been mentioned in previous correspondence, be seeking some very important information that we need to accurately build our schedules and our plan. I cannot stress this enough. It is essential that we know which direction families want to pursue, whether it be fully remote or whether it be the hybrid option. There are so many layers of planning that have to go into this that it has become clear to us is the first and foremost information that we need. We need to adhere to the safety guidelines and specifically physical distance. And as you've gotten a sense of, hopefully, that will be critical to know how many students are we talking about in a typical classroom that we should be planning for, or in the lunchroom, or on the bus. I do want to stress this piece that there will be times throughout the school year to change your mind, to change this decision. But it really is so important that we need you to let us know now what your plans are for the opening of school come September 16th. So we'll talk more about that as the year unfolds, but we really need you to make this decision now. And I know that that's hard. I know it's difficult. I know that you're really just getting this deeper sense of what the plan is in the models. And hopefully this presentation has provided you with a greater sense of that to be able to make an informed choice. I am asking that our families complete the survey by the end of the day on August the 11th, Tuesday, August the 11th, so that our building leaders can gather that information and begin their planning. Additional other next steps, Wednesday, August the 12th, the final plan that the district will be submitting to the Department of Education will be presented to the school committee. And as has been mentioned right now, although we have to submit our plans for the 3 different learning models, we are prioritizing and shaping our efforts around the hybrid model. We're going to continue negotiations with the Wilmington Teachers Association on finalizing an agreement. As mentioned, our administrative team will compile the information and family survey results. We are in the process of finalizing a very extensive array of protocols and guidelines for the safe return to school for our staff and, of course, our students. And we will be carefully monitoring developments at the state level. The final 2 slides here are the start of what I anticipate will be a number of questions that members of our community may have on our planning, on the learning models. I won't take the time now to read through them. Again, you can certainly reference these. These will be available as part of this presentation that will be posted on our website. And equally important, with full anticipation that there are going to be many more questions that emerge, I welcome you to email those to us. The email address is there, wpsreopening@wpsk12.com. We may not be responding directly to each question submitted, but we will compile those and we will begin to generate and populate a Q&A section on our website. And with all of that, that concludes my presentation. I will just conclude by saying, again, what I think I said at the outset, and that is that I know that this is all very difficult and challenging to think about. It's complicated. It's not easy. Most certainly be aware of that. But My hope is that this information will better inform our families to make a decision that you feel at this point in time is right for your family. If you have further questions, again, please don't hesitate to submit those to us. We'll do our very best to provide responses. All of this information, again, will be posted on our website, including this presentation, as well as the final plan that we'll be presenting to the school committee next week. Thank you so much for your time, for your patience, and for your support as we work through these challenges together. And my best to you and your family. Stay well.